In April 1990, 24-year-old Robert Baltovich graduated from the University of Toronto at Scarborough, a satellite campus in Toronto suburbs. It was during his time at this institution that he met and developed a relationship with 22-year-old Elizabeth Bain, a fellow student. It seemed all was well for Baltovich. He was young and deeply in love, looked forward to pursuing a summer job, and had aspirations for graduate school. Little did he know that 2 short months later, his life would change forever. On June 19, 1990, Baltovich was making his way to the campus gym for an evening workout when he spotted Bain's car. It was parked in a small lot next to a road that ran through the lush valley of Colonel Danforth Park. He had figured she either decided to go for a jog or had wanted to walk uphill to her evening lecture. After his workout, Baltovich went to Bain's class, but she was not there. Curious, he drove to her house, but there was no sign of her there either. Her mother told him that Bain had left the house around 4 p.m., saying she was going to check the tennis schedule at the campus courts. Baltovich found this strange. He knew the tennis courts operated on a first-come, first-served basis. Her mother also mentioned that when Bain left, she had been wearing black pants and a floral blouse, and had not been carrying any tennis equipment. Baltovich then recalled that Bain had told him she'd planned on having dinner that evening with a friend, Arlene Coventry, who had just returned home from university in Ottawa. Baltovich figured she must have left early and decided to skip her class. When the Bains called Baltovich the next morning inquiring about their daughter's whereabouts, he knew something was wrong. Baltovich immediately contacted Coventry. Not only was his girlfriend not with her, but to his surprise, Coventry told him that she and Bain had not had such plans to meet the night before. Where was Elizabeth Bain? 3 days after her disappearance, Bain's car was discovered across the street from an auto body shop less than a kilometer away from where Baltovich had reportedly last seen it. It was backed up against a fence with the windows shut and the doors locked. A large bloodstain was found in the vehicle's back seat, but there was still no sign of Bain. Homicide investigators Steve Reiser and Brian Raybould were called in and quickly zeroed in on Baltovich as their main suspect for no reason other than the fact that he was Bain's boyfriend. During his several-hour interrogation, Baltovich was asked, "Did you kill your girlfriend?" To which he replied,
Absolutely not. I loved Liz. I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her.
Reiser and Raybould then proceeded to try to get Baltovich to explain to them how, in a hypothetical situation, he might go about killing his girlfriend. Upon release, Reiser told Baltovich that it was very difficult to exclude him as a suspect. On the morning of November 19th, 5 months to the day after Bain's disappearance, detectives Reiser and Raybould appeared at Baltovich's home, charging him with the first-degree murder of girlfriend Elizabeth Bain. On February 4, 1992, Baltovich's first trial began before Justice John O'Driscoll, with more than 100 witnesses taking the stand. The Crown dropped the charge to second-degree murder, painting Baltovich as a spurned lover who became murderously angry when Bain tried to end their relationship. At the core of the Crown's case was the testimony of 2 witnesses, Marianne Perez and David Dibben. Marianne said that she had seen Robert and Elizabeth sitting together at a picnic table on campus at 5:40 p.m. on the day of her disappearance. If her evidence was correct, Robert was almost certainly Elizabeth's killer. Robert maintained that he had been home with his family at this time, and several of his family members confirmed that this was true. David testified that he had seen Robert driving Elizabeth's car on June 22nd. If David had really seen Robert in Elizabeth's car, where her blood was later found, then it was likely he had killed her. The jury believed Marianne's and David's testimony, even though there were serious questions relating to their reliability. Marianne had only a fuzzy recollection of the man she saw with Elizabeth on the night of her disappearance. However, she later read an article in the Toronto Sun that suggested Robert was a suspect and included a photo of him. She also spoke to members of Elizabeth's family who thought that Robert might have harmed her. Marianne then underwent hypnosis, during which she suddenly recovered much more detailed memories that implicated Robert. After this session, she picked out Robert's picture from a photo lineup. Mary Ann was one of 4 crowd witnesses who were hypnotized in an attempt to sharpen their memories. David's eyewitness testimony that he had seen Robert in Elizabeth's car was also problematic. He agreed that he wasn't really paying attention at the time of the alleged sighting, and that he did not have a good view of the driver. Baltovich continued to insist that he was innocent, offering a not guilty plea. His lawyer argued that there was significant evidence that someone else may have committed the crime, introducing witness testimony about a blond man seen near Bain before she vanished. However, despite the lack of concrete evidence, on March 31, 1992, Baltovich was found guilty of second-degree murder and was sentenced to a life term at Warkworth Institution with no eligibility for parole for 17 years. 7 years into his incarceration, Baltovich almost lost hope that his appeal would ever be heard. In the winter of 1999, Baltovich made a call to James Lockyer, a lawyer and the founding director of the Association in Defense of the Wrongfully Convicted. By March 2000, Lockyer began working on Baltovich's case, filing his own documents with the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal agreed that Robert's trial had been unfair and decided to review the case. Exactly 8 years after being convicted of murdering his girlfriend, Robert Baltovich was released on bail, pending an appeal of his 1992 conviction. When individuals are released from prison, they are not given the proper support and resources necessary for transitioning back into society. They are not directed to any guidance, employment, or housing services. Reintegration is therefore extremely challenging. Over the initial few weeks, it was hard adjusting to life as a free man. The hardest moments were those when he was alone. In prison, people had been around him constantly, so much so that on the outside, solitude had become a recipe for anxiety. 2 months after he was released, Baltovich began a 12-month library sciences program at Seneca College, later enrolling in a 2-year master's program at the University of Toronto and landing a summer internship at the Library of the Toronto Star. On April 22nd, the court ruled that Judge O'Driscoll's charge to the jury was unfair, unbalanced, and contained significant legal errors that were prejudicial to Baltovich. Prosecutors, who had planned to call 50 witnesses to the stand, said that they had no reasonable prospect of conviction. Ontario Superior Court Judge David McCombs told the jury that the only possible verdict could be not guilty.
It's an unbelievable relief. It's an 18-year nightmare, and in a half an hour it's over. So I'm just glad it's over. No more bail, no more conviction, no more charges. I get to live the rest of my life free.
In many cases, when individuals are deemed wrongfully convicted, there are people within the public who stand by the original conviction, including the family members of the victim. Bain's mother has said that she will never believe that Baltovich is innocent. Baltovich hopes that one day they can mend ties.
I was just saying earlier today, it's an 18-year nightmare for me. It's a never-ending nightmare for the Bains. I just hope that one day they can come to accept the fact that I didn't kill their daughter. I loved her. I missed her. I know they do. And maybe one of these days we can get together and grieve together.
Baltovich was a classic example of a man who was locked up for 8 years as a result of a rush to judgment. On Tuesday, June 19th of 1990, Elizabeth Bain disappeared, last seen on the Scarborough campus of the University of Toronto, where she was a 20-year-old student. To this day, her body has never been found. But 3 days after she disappeared, her car was found. and on the back seat of her car was a large quantity of blood, which made it clear that she had been murdered, and the blood was presumably hers. The subsequent DNA testing proved that indeed it was her blood in the back seat of the car. But the discovery of the car caused the homicide squad to immediately become involved, the Toronto Homicide Squad. And within 1 hour and 40 minutes of the discovery of the car, for no reason at all except that he was Elizabeth Bain's boyfriend, the Homicide Squad arranged for the Mobile Surveillance Squad, the Toronto Mobile Surveillance Squad, to place Rob Baltovich under surveillance. And that report had written on it in handwriting at the time, written at that time, that the purpose of the surveillance was, and I quote, to support the arrest of the suspect on the subsequent charge of murder. That was the wording. In other words, within less than 2 hours of realizing that Elizabeth Bain had been murdered, they had decided that Rob Baltovich was going to be arrested for the murder. Believe me, they didn't have one iota of evidence against him then, but he was the boyfriend of Elizabeth Bain. That was enough. And that rush to judgment led to the creation of a case against Rob Baltovich that had no merit at all, but had an appealing view to the police, to the prosecution, and indeed to the jury that convicted him at his trial. He spent 8 years in jail for a crime he didn't commit because of that rush to judgment.
During an interview following Baltovich's acquittal, Detective Brian Raybould expressed to a reporter,
"If we had capital punishment, I'd take the guy out against the wall, shoot him, and not feel bad about it."
In 2010, Robert Baltovich filed a $13 million civil lawsuit that accused the Crown and police of a rush to judgment and of failing to disclose information. It was during these lawsuit proceedings that a previously undisclosed note, penned by homicide detective Brian Raybould, was discovered.
The note was written 3 days after Baltovich was arrested in November 1990, but it was only discovered by the Baltovich team last year, amid more than 13,000 documents turned over by the Crown as part of the lawsuit proceedings. The note appears to detail a meeting with forensic experts regarding blood that was found in Bain's car, evidence that appears to go against the police theory that Baltovich transported Bain's body to its final resting place 3 days after she was murdered. According to Baltovich's lawyers, copies of the investigators' notes that were handed over as part of the Baltovich appeal in the late 90s differed from his notes that were handed over as part of the lawsuit proceedings last fall. They're alleging the officer tampered with his notes because the evidence he heard from forensic experts didn't coincide with the police theory of what happened. According to the Baltovich team, information from the meeting with the forensic experts was never disclosed to Baltovich, his trial lawyers, or his appeal lawyers, despite several attempts to garner the information by appeal lawyer James Lockyer. In a responding court filing, the Attorney General's office argues that a diligent review of the police file during the appeal would have produced the investigator's note. Asked for comment today, a police spokesperson denied the allegations of a cover-up.
The Crown's case against Baltovich was based on unreliable eyewitness testimony. The Supreme Court has now made it clear that hypnosis is a dangerous technique for enhancing memory that has no place in a criminal prosecution. The Supreme Court has outlined various problems with eyewitness evidence derived from hypnosis, including that while it is not generally accepted that hypnosis always produces unreliable memories, neither is it clear when hypnosis results in pseudo-memories, or how a witness, jury, or judge might distinguish between fabricated and accurate memories. The fallibility of eyewitness identification has been a central concern in a number of inquiries into wrongful convictions, including those of Thomas Sappenow, Stephen Trescott, and Anthony Hannemeyer. Witnesses make incorrect identifications at an alarmingly high rate. In fact, of the Innocence Project's first 225 exonerations of individuals who have been wrongfully convicted in the United States, 77% were based on mistaken eyewitness identification. Mary Ann was shown a photo array of several photos presented at once, rather than a sequential lineup where images are presented one at a time. This technique is dangerous since the eyewitness may choose the picture from the array that is the best fit, even if none of the photos match the real perpetrator. Mary Ann stated at Baltovich's trial that she had picked out his photo by a process of elimination. The officer who conducted the lineup not only knew one of the photos was Robert's, but informed Mary Ann as much before she made her selection. Lineups should be conducted by members of the force who do not know the identity of the suspect. This is so they cannot deliberately or accidentally convey information to the witness to cause her to select the suspect that police have in mind. It is a fundamental guarantee of the criminal justice system that the presiding judge over a trial acts with impartiality. Decisions made should be based on objective criteria rather than on the basis of bias, prejudice, or preferring the benefit of one person over another for improper reasons. Instead of providing an impartial summation of the evidence, Judge O'Driscoll dominated the jury with his own opinions and projected an aura of guilt over Baltovich. He additionally failed to point out any concerns in regard to the eyewitness testimony of Mary Ann Perez and David Dibben. All of these factors compromised Baltovich's right to a fair trial, a fundamental guarantee under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In 2010, Baltovich sought compensation from the Government of Ontario for the 8 years he spent in prison. The province refused to compensate Baltovich, stating that an acquittal was not sufficient enough to meet the financial compensation threshold. To acquire compensation, a finding of factual innocence is required, a daunting feat in cases that do not involve DNA evidence. Although this chapter is closed for Robert Baltovich, the mystery of Elizabeth Bain's disappearance still lives on. Is it possible that Bain's killer remained undetected in the Scarborough area for 3 years after her death? James Lockyer has repeatedly said that he suspects convicted sex killer Paul Bernardo was involved in Bain's disappearance. A private investigator hired by Baltovich at the time of Bernardo's arrest found some convincing connections. When Bain's car was found, the passenger seat was almost fully reclined. Also found in Bain's car were a package of Du Maurier light cigarettes, a brand Bernardo used to smoke on a regular basis. Bernardo also fit the description given at Baltovich's first trial of a blond man seen with Bain shortly before she vanished. To this day, Bernardo has denied any involvement in Elizabeth Bain's disappearance or death.